Hello, everyone. I am here with Don Brown, candidate for the United States Senate. Don, thanks for taking time to talk with me today. You and I have gotten to know each other a little bit over the last couple of months, but I'll admit before that, I knew your name, but I didn't know much about you, didn't know what to make of you. For people who haven't met you before, who is Don Brown?
I'm a guy that grew up in eastern North Carolina fishing the Roanoke River, the Albemarle Sound, the Pamlico Sound. I grew up as an eastern North Carolina boy, went to school in Chapel Hill, and one of the few that came out of Chapel Hill more conservative than I went in, which proves there is a God. Went over to law school at Campbell in Bowie when the school was in Bowie's Creek. So I lived in Harnett County. I went into the Navy as a JAG officer, came out and became an author, and have had 16 books published, and most of them were military, either fiction or nonfiction. The last 5 or so have been nonfiction. My most recent release, Travesty, I'll get it mixed up, Kangaroo Court, was my first non-military book, but it was a look at Democrat political prosecutions. I have worked since I've gotten out of the Navy pretty intensely with rules of engagement issues to protect our veterans and our service members. I worked very closely with our now Secretary of War, he used to be Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, on a couple of nationally, prominent cases. Unfortunately, they were prominent because people got hurt. One involved a shoot down of a Chinook helicopter in Afghanistan, Extortion 17. We lost 17 members of SEAL Team 6, 30 Americans. Wrote a book on that, did a movie on that. Pete and I worked together for over 2 years to try to get a young paratrooper, Lieutenant Clint Durrance, out of Leavenworth. He had been sentenced to almost 20 years for a quote unquote murder when his platoon got into a firefight. So I've been very actively involved in working in military affairs. Just met with the state commander, Edward Beard, just the other day in Fayetteville. So I'm a military veteran, and but North Carolina is in my heart. U.S. military is in my heart. And so somehow, some way I wound up here as a Republican candidate for United States Senate. If you can figure the rest out, we'll make some progress today there.
That sounds good. So why U.S. Senate? Why, it seems pretty clear to me that military issues, national security is super important to you. So federal level makes a lot of sense, but why U.S. Senate?
It's interesting because, Tillis is going to lose. Somebody conservative needed to step up. I've said before that I would go to war for President Trump. What I mean by that is I've seen the way he operates against the flow of the deep state. In the Pentagon, for example, Pete and I are working to try to persuade him to pardon Lawrence, and the senior brass at the Pentagon comes in and tries to talk him out of it. General Milley came into the president's office. We know that, tried to talk the president out of it. The president threw him out of the office. Secretary Esper came in, tried to talk him out of it. The president threw him out of office. So I've been battling in these issues. And so it was clear Tillis is going to lose, and probably for good reason. And there was a void. It's not like I really wanted to do that. I'd run for Congress, and we did okay. It's kind of interesting. Mark Harris won that race, and I'm glad. I love Mark Harris, and I think he is the leader of our North Carolina congressional delegation. And even though he's just a rookie congressman, it isn't about the time in office that counts. But we jumped into the congressional race in November with a March primary, and so we're trying to campaign over the holidays, and everybody's in the Christmas mood, the Thanksgiving mood, and rightly so. But a number of my opponent's supporters, believe it or not, from that congressional race came to me and said, Don, you're the guy. We need you to run. We need you to run. And, I try not to get caught up to too much of that. Andrew, I think maybe we talked about this when we last interviewed. Tillis had dropped out or was about to drop out. And I said that had Laura Trump jumped in the race, I'd be at the beach. Right. I've not been at the beach all summer. But I think part of the issue here is that we are going to be, and I've said this in the campaign trail, we're going to be facing a battle for the survival of this republic, and no Republicans, or at least no candidates, are raising the national debt as a major. I call it the biggest, ticking time bomb that nobody's paying attention to. And even though under President Trump we have slowed the rate of growth. Look, during the Democrats' reign, In the Biden years, it was between $55,000 to $60,000 a second. Think about that. Now we're at $37,000 a second. The debt is increasing. It's not sustainable. So I'm running for love of country and love of my state. I'd rather someone else that I could feel good about getting behind step in, but that's not going to happen, I don't think. So it's like President Reagan once said, if not us, then who? And if not now, then when? And here we are. At least I get to talk to you. You know, there's a lot of good sides to it. Met Andrew Dunn, you know, met a lot of good friends. So I look at the silver lining in the cloud.
Well, I appreciate that. Yeah, I mean, I'm extremely concerned about the national debt, but I really haven't heard much about it from Republicans over the last 10 years or so. You know, there was the Tea Party movement. It was a big deal, and then it kind of got subsumed by other issues. What, you know, do you still think that issue resonates with folks?
Well, it has resonated. And what I can say to you is this. I think I may have mentioned before we went online a second ago, we've been in 60 counties now. And when I have time to talk, you know, it's interesting, these forums, you come in, sometimes you're the county Republican Party, and it's the pass the lollipop situation. So you get 2 minutes or whatever, because you got school board candidates, county commission. Those are very important offices. But when I get a chance to really go into it, it does resonate because, you know, and I use the example that every great nation that ever sort of dominated the earth, from the Romans, when you read the New Testament, they had the denarius. The Spanish, you know, when Columbus discovered America, had the peso, and the British had the pound sterling, Dutch had the gelding. These nations had the powerful currency, the most powerful currency. And whenever the currency fell, the nation fell. It's interesting because I've told folks this as well. 10, 15 years ago, maybe a little longer, our church in Charlotte was involved in bringing kids over from Belarus. The program was called ABRO, which was the American Belarusian Relief Organization.
Okay. And
these kids were in the southeastern part of the country in Belarus, just across the border from Chernobyl. You remember Chernobyl in Ukraine.
Right.
And the radioactive spillout affected, it's perhaps still does, you know, the entire population. So doctors said if you bring the kids over for 3 months in the summer, you can get them out of the environment, helps them. And we had kids being adopted. Well, there was a kid over there whose brother and sister were going to be adopted by an American family in the Charlotte area, but the third kid was still there. So I went there along with a friend of mine, and I can speak a little Russian with a redneck accent, which is true. I kind of joke about that. And we went there, though, to make a plea to try to get the kid out of the country. But during that period of time, I'll never forget this. We went into this outdoor open mart, okay, and they were selling like glassware and, you know, art,
sure,
shows and stuff. Well, there was this Russian chess set, handmade, that I saw, and I like chess sets. I admire chess sets better than I can play chess, but this was hand carved and painted, and I wanted that chess set. So I pulled out a $20 bill, and I'll never forget. Here's what happened. It almost started a riot. Huh. And what I was doing was actually, it turned out to be, unbeknownst to me, illegal in Belarus. But it almost started a riot because those folks wanted that American currency. And in retrospect, I didn't understand what I was seeing at the time, but that's a testament to the power of the American dollar. And the problem is, when you have a national debt that continues to explode, the law of mathematics is working against us. And so with all these nations that I've shared with you, when you look at Britain, for example, they used to say the sun never sets on British soil. Well, the pound sterling officially fell as the international currency of trade to the U.S. dollar at Bretton Woods in 1944. There was a transitional period during World War II as we got stronger and stronger, and the Yankee dollar is the reason. And I'll tell folks that I'm speaking to, we saw how President Trump sent those B-2 bombers for that surgical strike against Iran's nuclear facility. We're only able to buy those multi-billion-dollar aircraft because we're an economic superpower. And if we don't get this national debt situation under control, it's not enough just to reduce it from $55,000 a second to $37,000 a second, which computes to about $2.8 billion per day. It's not enough just to lower the rate. We've got to reverse it. We ought to be putting $37,000 back into the bank and into the black and reducing this debt. And the only way, you cannot tax yourself out of the debt. It's mathematically impossible. The only way to do this is to attack the deep state. That means taking out agencies that are not constitutionally authorized and applying the money back to the debt. Because if we lose the dollar, they're going to be moving to something that there's the battle right now is over central bank digital currency. Democrats are pushing it. Central banks are pushing it. President Trump has been pushing support for private cryptocurrencies, and I think as an alternative, I think he sees what's happening. But we've got to wage war against the size and scope of the federal government. And you said a minute ago, you don't hear it from Republican candidates. You're hearing it from this candidate. I'm hitting it head on.
Yeah.
And, win, lose, or draw. And by the way, we tend to win this race. That message has got to be out there. The Doge cuts should be solidified, and I think, Elon got a little frustrated. We got to attack this debt problem. And anyway, I didn't mean to preach a sermon there, but you asked about the central plank. And the rest of it won't matter if we lose $1. So, and we got to keep having paper dollars too, by the way. So.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right about that. I don't think a lot of people, it's kind of hard to conceptualize how important having the dollar as the world's reserve currency is.
Right.
Because it's such an amorphous term, but I'm glad that you're out there talking about it.
Yeah, and not only that, but when Nixon took us off the gold standard, I guess it was 71, he basically forced an arrangement with the Arab countries that we now have this petrodollar concept. Means that all the oil around the world is traded in dollars. There's a big boost to our economy. And you have this 5-nation conglomerate, BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa, and others behind them that are trying to replace the dollar now. And the Saudis were pushing before Trump was, took office again. Were pushing to end the petrodollar arrangement. Now, the power of Trump's personality will keep the Saudis at bay, but he's leaving office in January 20th of 2029. And so we have a battle in front of us. So we got to recognize it now. We can't keep having our heads in the sand here.
Yeah. To stay on the economy, one of the biggest bets of the Trump administration has been that tariffs or the threat of tariffs would be able to rearrange, global trade and get America in a better trading position. There's a deep strain in the Republican Party today, in North Carolina and around the country that's very tied to the idea of free markets, free trade. Where do you stand on the Trump administration's tariffs?
Well, we all believe in free markets. You can't have a free market when China is tariffing the heck out of what we have. That's the first thing. Now, listen, my thinking on tariffs has evolved. Trump's been ahead of a lot of us on many things. He came out against Afghanistan and Iraq, and look at the way all that ended. It turned out he was right from the beginning. But as far as tariffs go, I'll tell folks, if you haven't listened to the president's interview with Joe Rogan around September, October of last year, for 3 hours, you should go watch it, because the president in that interview shows his brilliance. He starts out by talking about Civil War and how Robert E. Lee lived inside of Lincoln's head because Lincoln couldn't find a general until he found this drunk out of Ohio named U.S. Grant. Then he goes into the need for small nuclear reactors and talks about 90 rhubarb concrete the French are using. I said, what in the world is that? Showing a command of engineering. But when he gets to the talk on tariffs, I think this is enlightening. He points out, and this is accurate, that during the McKinley administration, we were making so much money off tariffs that they had to have an administration. They had to have an internal administration to figure out how to spend the money, which is historically accurate. So fast forward to now, we've had anti-tariff, free market, but the free trader proponents, of which I'm a free trader proponent, don't give you the rest of the story, that the rest of the world is screwing us over. You don't hear that part. And so when Trump proposes this, we have Tillis, for example, who's, I like to joke around, Andrew, that I ran him out of the race, so it's kind of fun. I can say that, you and I can chuckle about it. But Tillis was saying during interviews, whose neck am I going to choke if this doesn't work? You may remember, worse to that effect. Who am I going to strangle? Something like that. And they were predicting, the economy will collapse. You're going to have all kinds of depression scenarios. Well, here we are. We're 250 some days. I've lost track into the administration. Reported $350 billion in revenue coming in. So clearly, the president's tariffs have not caused the economy to collapse. I think you could make an opposite argument. Having said that, I was with a very prominent farmer in Eastern North Carolina the other day, and we were talking about these things, and he was saying, listen, the tariffs are killing us because he's a big tobacco farmer. And by the way, I know Roy Cooper's from Nash County, but I bet you I'm probably the only Senate candidates grown up working in tobacco inside of tobacco farms because my granddaddy's a tobacco farm. But this fellow was saying that the tariffs are hurting us because we were selling our tobacco into China, and so there are segments of the economy that can make the argument, hey, we're hurting here. The same farmer told me, however, that on the other side, the tariffs were helping him. So it appears to be kind of a balance. But I think that to answer your question, the proof is in the pudding. We've not had a collapse. We've made tremendous revenue from it, and I think the issue is the strategic use of these tariffs, depending on the goods, the products, depending on what the other nation's doing, and they seem to be working. So at this point, my approach would be, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. The president's done a great job, of course, of opening up energy, and I think that the principal key to the economy is the abundant flow of fossil fuels. If you hear what I'm saying, the whole green new energy scam is a bunch of BS. But once the president comes into office and reopens and begins to issue permits again and stop the blocking of drilling, we've seen, although we got to get prices down more, we've seen gasoline prices drop precipitously. I've been all over the state. I can tell you the best prices appear to be in the Fayetteville area. We bought gas in the 240 range over there in places.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, 240, 250. It varies depending on where you are in the state. I can almost tell you where the expensive spots are. But nonetheless, gasoline prices have come down. That's a help. But to your question, the tariffs seem to have a much more positive impact than before. And by the way, we have got to, and Trump is right about this also, you can't flush your manufacturing out the window. And when the Democrats came in, when I say, listen, I'm as critical of our own Republicans as I am the Democrat Party, and when we need to criticize. And when you look at NAFTA, for example, Bush 41 started it and Clinton finished it. But you had NAFTA, you had most favored trade nation, the status to China. You had putting China in the World Trade Organization. Can you imagine, Andrew, the idiocy of taking your largest potential economic adversary and putting them on steroids, all because certain folks in the United States want cheap labor and want to be able to buy cheap goods. But when you flush your industry out, maybe I mentioned this before, I've been to Cabarrus County several times. I've asked the question, where is our textile industry? You go to High Point, where's our furniture? Flush down the drain. So tariffs are going to help bring industry back. But the thing that will really bring our industry back is one of the things I've been running on. We've got to end the Internal Revenue Service. We have to end not only the individual income tax, but the corporate income tax. Now think about this. When Trump was talking about in his interview with Joe Rogan, when he was talking about all the money we're making on tariffs, the thing that was not said is this, and it's a point I've been hitting. If you go from 1880 to about 1913, when I believe this country made its greatest constitutional mistake with the 16th Amendment income tax,
right,
by passing the first Income Tax Act, by the Federal Reserve Act. During that period of time, from 1880 to 1913, the United States underwent the greatest industrial boom, the industrial revolution in history. And get this, here's the rest of the story, with zero income tax. And that shows, so I'm a free trader if there is free trade, but my basic philosophy, I start with this, that the only good tax is a repealed tax. The only good regulation is a repeal regulation. Now, I understand we got to have, a de minimis level of taxation and regulation. I get that. There is a legitimate purpose for government. So you're not an anarchist, but we've gone hog wild crazy in taxation and regulation. And therein lies the cure to really healing our economy and returning us to where we were and revitalizing our industrial base.
Yeah, no, it makes a ton of sense. Switching gears a little bit, I'm here in Charlotte. I believe you live in Union County. Is that correct?
I live in Union County, have an office in Charlotte, so I'm around the QC all the time. So,
well, here in Charlotte, we had a tough weekend. I mean, there were 4 homicides within 24 hours, and then another near fatal stabbing uptown. Homicides, especially uptown, are up 200+% over last year. Is there a federal role in dealing with that? With
1,000%. After Arena, after Arena's murder became national news, and that was several weeks after she's actually killed, I immediately called on President Trump to send the National Guard in to stabilize the Charlotte light rail. When you look at the history of the light rail, when it came in under McCrory, there were officers on board some of the cars. Democrats took control of city council and put in private security, then pulled in, it became a cesspool. So I immediately called for that on September the 9th. And October 2nd, the Charlotte chapter of the Fraternal Order of Police Lodge 9 joined in that call for National Guard to come in. And I believe my friend Edwin Peacock may have also. Somebody told me that. I've not talked to Edwin about it. He's the only Republican we've got around. But there is a federal rule. And when you look at the constitutional authority granted to the president certainly has the power and the ability to send in the National Guard in situations when Americans' lives and properties are at stake. And the whole notion that you have to be invited by a Democrat governor or a Democrat mayor is nonsense. We have an act called the Insurrection Act, and two provisions of that act specifically allow the president to federalize and send in troops. One, to enforce federal law, and two, to protect Americans' constitutional rights. And if you look at the history of that act, we'll see a couple of examples that are pretty prominent. President Eisenhower sent troops in to Little Rock. In fact, sent in the 101st Airborne over the Democrat government's objection to integrate the University of Arkansas. President Kennedy, same thing. When James Meredith was accepted as a student at the University of Mississippi, sent in federalized the National Guard. The president can do this. Somebody, I have some friends in the media, and one who's interviewed me a few times on the network said, well, that'll strengthen the National Guard. No, not really, because North Carolina National Guard can be federalized. And here's what I think should happen. I think it should be a multi-stage process. One, you send the Guard, and by the way, let me repeat, the police union is asking for this. And I talked to the chapter president just the other day, and he told me, which is revealing, that Charlotte Mecklenburg has grown, the population has grown by 60,000 since 2000. In the last 9 years, 60,000 new officers, and 60,000 growth in population. We have fewer officers than we had in 2018.
Right.
It's absolutely ridiculous. So they're being strained, as you mentioned. He mentioned they're having to pull officers into what is around here called the uptown area. I still call it downtown just to torque them a little bit, but the uptown Charlotte area, which is pulling folks from officers from other sections of the city. We had this wonderful young lady who was just murdered in South Park just last week. Single mom was going to pursue her nursing degree. So here's what I think should happen. I think we ought to send the Guard in for 60 days, give Charlotte Mecklenburg city government 30 days to clean its act up, and get officers on the street. See, this is a problem of a misallocation of resources and contorted political thinking. Vi Lyles, the mayor, when the word broke of Arena's murder, was all worried about mental health. Now listen, I'm not saying we don't have people on the street. They shouldn't be off the street. But her first reaction should have been concern for the young lady and her family, and the fact that her own mass transit is dangerous. So this is their thinking. So you give Charlotte Mecklenburg 30 days to reinforce those police officers and to get them the resources they need. And if they can't do it at the end of 30 days, then I think at some point, the Speaker of the North Carolina House of Representatives the NC legislature should use its authority under the North Carolina Constitution and under the North Carolina General Statutes to come in and either take total control of the city government or take control of what portions they need to take control of to ensure that the citizens of Charlotte are protected. And so listen, when I came to Charlotte after coming out of the Navy, when I came to the area in the early 90s, we had a 6-5 Republican majority. McCrory was mayor, Venroot was mayor. I think Venroot first, then McCrory, if I'm not mistaken. And they weren't as conservative as I am. I'm Jesse Helms conservative, but you had good business policy. They brought the Panthers in. The city was well managed. Lynn Wheeler was there, Don Reed was there, Mike Jackson was there. I knew all those folks. They had their differences, etc., but the city was pretty well managed. Now it's gone to absolute hell in a handbasket, and it's almost like we're talking about what's happening in New York with this crazy Muslim communist about to get elected. Well, we got some nutcases in the Charlotte City Council are just about as bad. We're not New York, so you don't hear about it, and they're not running for mayor yet. But I think the state ought to consider stepping in, using its authority under the state constitution and the general statutes to step in. And if the city council can't get it done, to clean up law enforcement. And I'm not knocking our officers. Our officers need help. We have great police officers all over the state of North Carolina and in Charlotte, but they've been neglected because of woke philosophy. So I'd like to see that happen.
Got it. Well, hey, last question for you. If you read the news, you might forget that there even is a primary election coming up in March. It really seems like, after President Trump gave Michael Whatley the endorsement in this race, it's kind of been written off. So how do you campaign in that environment? What do you tell folks, and how do you draw distinctions between yourself and Mr. Whatley?
First of all, let me just say that I agree with you that the mainstream media wants to portray this as a two-man race, but I've been in 60 counties, and I can tell you there are grassroots folks that are really fired up about a number of things. And I love President Trump. This is North Carolina. We got to win. We have got to win this race. And the president's endorsements sometimes work and sometimes don't. You can look at Bo Hines. You can look at Herschel Walker. You can look at Dr. Oz. You can go to Georgia, look at David Perdue and Kelly Loeffler. We have got to win this. And so what I'm doing is I'm hitting on the issues that have to drive this race. And I believe that I'm the best qualified to prosecute Roy Cooper in the court of public opinion. I've said this before. The last time I saw my daddy alive, I was looking through the outside glass of a nursing home. And so because of his unconstitutional mandates, my sister and I were standing out, Plymouth, North Carolina, the poorest county in the state economically, on a frozen grass, looking through there, waving at him. I'm going to prosecute him and take him down. It's interesting because in the Republican Party, we have a long tradition of debate. And candidates ought to be able to debate, and North Carolina voters. And I can tell you, we love and respect the president, but our people, there are thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of North County Republicans that want to see debate. The Onslow County Republican Party invited me and Andy Nilsson and Mike Whatley to debate. Andy left the race. I accepted. Whatley turned him down. So, my question is, what are they afraid of? So, I think that you have certain liberal elements in the media that would like to see Cooper Whatley because they would like to see the weakest Republican go against Cooper. They don't want to touch me with a 10-foot pole. Trust me. So we continue to push our message. I believe what Jesus said, the truth will set you free. So we push our message, and we have got to have a plan within the Republican Party to attack the national debt. I'm the only candidate that I know anywhere running, not for Senate, all around the country or Congress, that has a plan for that. I call it the Deep State Reduction Act. I'm going to put legislation on the floor, take out 2/3 of all federal employees over a 10-year period, mandate take out 2/3 of all federal agencies. We've got to have this type of radical meat cleaver approach, or it won't matter. For example, let's say if Whatley were able, and I don't think Mike can beat Cooper. I don't think he can. But let's say he could beat me. Well, I don't think he can beat me either, believe it or not. But let's say he could get past me and get past Cooper. I've made the argument and continue to do it, that status quo republicanism is not going to save the country. If we go back and revert to status quo republicanism, we are just kicking the can down the road until we go off the cliff. You put a Democrat in there, we're going to go off the cliff a lot faster. So all we're doing, unless the Congress is the branch of government under the United States Constitution that is supposed to take control of the federal government, much like what we see in North Carolina when our General Assembly passed Arena's law after this disaster in Charlotte. That was not being led by the government, it was being led by the General Assembly. Congress has to take control of our financial disaster that is a ticking time bomb. I'm running for this office because I love my state and I love my country. I'd rather not be running for it. I would rather go to the beach, strike a good Monte Cristo or a Macanudo, or I'm going to get some hate mail from anti-tobacco people, but I'd rather go to the beach and find myself a good Adirondack chair and write another book. But our country's in trouble. And so I believe that our message will resonate. We're going to get past what is an attempt to coronate. The Democrats coronated Kamala Harris without a debate, without a vote, and we criticize and ridicule the Democrats for that, and rightly so. Our party appears to be doing the same thing. And I say to the leadership of the party, what are you afraid of? You're afraid I'm going to take you Whatley in a debate? You're worried about that? Of course they are. That's why they're trying to rush it through. President Trump doesn't know me that well, but he's going to get a better ally in the United States Senate than he realizes he would get with Wiley. I can guarantee you that.
All right. Well, Don Brown, thank you so much for the time today. I'm sure that a lot of viewers here will see you out and about around the state over the next couple months. So thank you so much, and I wish you safe travels.
Thank you, Andrew. We appreciate your great work. Love your publication. Keep up the good work.